Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking to Council Member Jimmy Van Bramer. We're going to be talking about COVID-19 and the challenges the district faced in 2020. We're also going to talk about issues such as the city's budget. We're going to talk about the police, and we're going to talk about rezonings. Furthermore, we're going to discuss the new candidates that are looking to replace him for the 26th council district. And last of all, we're going to discuss his proposed run or whether he's going to run for Queensborough president. Councilman, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, listen, I just want to kick off the ball with your annual report. Every year you do an annual report that does a review, of the previous year. Of course, we're looking at 2020 now. Could you just tell us, why you do these reports and sort of, what you hope to achieve with them?
Well, I've always aimed to be transparent about the work I do and accountable to my constituents. So I have every year issued an annual report that tells my constituents exactly how many constituent cases we handled, for example, and what's the status of a lot of the capital projects in the district, because it's the constituents' taxpayer dollars that are funding those projects. So updating folks and being transparent and accountable is incredibly important to me. And there's a lot this year to report on. Obviously, it was a year dominated by COVID, and all of us are changed as a result of what's happened in our world. But the work continues. In fact, there was more work than ever because of the pandemic. And I think that's reflected in the record number of constituent cases that me and my staff handled.
Yeah, I mean, I see 5,659 cases, that's up, more than 1,000 from 2019. But I just, a lot of it, as you mentioned, was based on COVID. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you were doing? You're working with mutual aid groups, mask distribution. You was also helping small businesses, etc. Could you just sort of give people a rundown as to what you were doing?
Sure. Well, when COVID struck in mid-March, we were all, I think, unprepared emotionally, and in some ways, the city, for what was to come. No one knew exactly the tidal wave that was about to crash upon the city of New York. But while the office closed on March 12th and I sent my staff home, we immediately started working remotely and in person to assist constituents, because we knew that the calls would come, that there would be many people concerned. And initially, of course, there was a wave of unemployment claims, and so many of our restaurant workers in particular laid off really in one fell swoop, and the office went about trying to expedite those claims because there was a backlog, as you know.
Yeah.
And it just kept going, right? The reverberations of the pandemic just kept going. And so, yeah, there were small businesses reaching out. There were so many people who were desperate for information and assistance. Obviously, there were lots of people getting sick. There were a lot of people who were in pretty desperate straits. And our office kept operating. My staff kept working. Social media became an increasingly important tool for people to reach out to me and my staff. And we made sure that the focus was on health and well-being, doing all we could to partner with the mayor, the governor, be out there, making sure that people saw me and the staff, and to make sure that we were available to help people. And I think that's the most important thing. So we immediately started with the mask and sanitizer distribution. Obviously, the city council allocated an extra $23 million for food distribution, working with the food czar. We got a call, for example, from Queensbridge, the Jacob Reese settlement house, that they weren't getting food for the seniors, who obviously were mostly homebound now because the senior center had closed. And I was able to call Catherine Garcia and say, where is the food for Queensbridge? We had a similar situation, Ravenswood. And we had a food distribution site at the Woodside houses with Bishop Taylor, working with the UJA and some other organizations. So we obviously have done all we could to help as many people as we possibly can through what is obviously the most difficult time in so many of our lives, all the while continuing to function. The city council itself went remote in terms of our committee hearings, passing legislation. Obviously, we went through a big budget fight in June. And so all of that work continued as well, even if many of those meetings took place virtually. So we kept the constituent services operation going stronger than ever, which is the most important thing. Also continued to legislate and be present at the city council whenever there were meetings and hearings, pass some important pieces of legislation. As you know, I voted against the budget in June, and we continued to follow the capital projects and the work that is essential to the people of the district.
Okay, now where do things stand now in terms of COVID? You know, with pantries, with food distribution right now. I mean, we've got another shutdown. We have a lot of undocumented immigrants that aren't getting any help from the state or the federal government. So where does it all stand now?
Well, look, the federal government's response to the pandemic has been an absolute disgrace. And the truth is, the state and even the administration and City Hall haven't done nearly enough. There is a food crisis. There's food insecurity at record levels, and we should be allocating more. We should be providing more funding for food distribution and assisting all of these incredible grassroots efforts, like the food pantries, like Mosaic, like LIC Relief, and of course the mutual aid networks, which are separate from government and not working with government, but community-led, and all of those deserve as much support as possible. So I think the fact that we have a president who's more obsessed with a coup and less concerned with keeping people alive is obviously not helpful. But I also think that the state and city should kick in more money for food pantries that do accept city funding, that will accept additional food, and obviously need that.
Okay. Now, part of your report also mentions, the hardship small businesses are facing. I guess particularly bars and restaurants with, indoor dining shut down again, and of course we're in the middle of winter, which makes outdoor dining very difficult. So just tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to help small businesses. You mentioned, as I said in your report, promoting, open streets restaurants, and also, I guess, outdoor dining, etc. So could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I was one of the first council members, obviously with Councilmember Reynoso leading the charge to support outdoor restaurants and open restaurants. And as I think that proved to be a lifeline for so many small businesses. I've certainly spoken to some of our local restaurant owners who are obviously very quiet right now and struggling right now, but many have said they did well enough in the summer summer, because of open restaurants, that they just might be able to make it through this period and see it through to the other end. So that was important. And making it permanent is also important because it was a lifeline for both the businesses during this past summer and fall, but also for people who were able to get out and safely socialize and actually have some degree of normalcy while also promoting a small business and small jobs, small businesses that hire locally. But making it permanent is also important in terms of us re-envisioning how we use our streets, on our sidewalks, and how we promote these small businesses. Beyond the crisis, though, there always was a crisis with rent, and that's why I'm a big supporter of the Small Business Job Survival Act, commercial rent control. Obviously, we need a federal and state bailout. We need to revisit all of these taxes that small businesses are levied, and so we need to absolutely use all of the tools in the toolbox to save our small businesses and to make sure that they're sustainable, viable, and able to be profitable. Because when they're profitable, they're able to hire, and they hire locally, and so this is a really important piece of the new economy that will and must emerge from this crisis.
Okay. Now, along those lines, you sponsored legislation helping cultural institutions perform outdoors, and with and have ticketed events. Can you just tell us about what led you to sponsor that legislation and how you see it unfold?
Sure. Well, as the chair of cultural affairs and libraries in the city council for the last 11 years, I'm proud to represent the cultural community and artists and cultural workers, music workers. And we had great success with open restaurants, which was a great stabilizer and provider of jobs. But we did not, as a city, come through for artists and cultural workers. Over 250,000 cultural workers, artists of all kinds, performers, actors, lost their jobs with the pandemic. Live performances shut down. Venues have been closed. Now, culture never closed and it continued, but the ability of artists to work and to get paid for their work did end for so many. That's why it was important to use the Open Restaurants program as an inspiration for open culture, where we would have a streamlined application process, just as we have for open restaurants, and where we would allow ticketed and paid performances in city streets, and hopefully in even more locations going forward, where cultural organizations, particularly small cultural organizations, like the Queensboro Dance Festival, like the Chocolate Factory, where they could actually charge, even have an online ticketing process, and stage a production in the street, and then be able to pay the artists who perform. That's incredibly important to me. And that would both, I think, serve the function of allowing cultural organizations to produce work again, perform, gain some revenue, and pay artists. But also imagine this spring, as we've all come through this and would still be experiencing great loss in so many ways, walking through your neighborhood and seeing a ballet performance, hearing a singer, listening to a comedian, and I think it's going to be a boost to the spirits of the people of the city of New York, and also a real way that I hope is permanent, again, of re-envisioning how we use streets and sidewalks and public land, that reactivates them and allows people to work and get paid for their work, right? There are so many people who are hurting right now And we need to think out of the box and create programs like this that put people back to work and lift the collective spirits of our people.
Okay. All right. A big component of 2020 was the budget, which you referred to a few moments ago. You voted against it. Could you just tell us why you voted against it? Because it's also a big component of your report too.
Sure. Well, look, what we are seeing right now are so many people, particularly working people, and communities that have long been neglected, suffering disproportionately. Lower income communities, Black and brown communities, immigrant communities, suffering disproportionately. And when we adopt austerity budgets, in other words, when we have shortfalls, the only answer is to cut programs and services that will disproportionately harm the very people who are already at the margins of our society. We are only perpetuating inequality. And I think with the murder of George Floyd and the incredibly powerful Black Lives Matter movement, emerged a real sense among many people that we were spending entirely too much money on policing communities, and that was at the expense of providing real meaningful support in terms of health care and education and so many other services that are vital to the wellness and health of people. And I agree with that proposition. So I felt very strongly and agreed that we should reduce the budget of the NYPD by at least $1 billion, reallocate that money to Black and brown communities and to others who were so disproportionately impacted by COVID and of course by systemic racism. And that was my vote, and it was a vote that I'm still extremely proud of. It's a principled one, and I'll continue my work in that vein for as long as I'm in public office, because we have to re-envision public safety. We have to respond to the call of so many people, particularly young people of color, who have said this system is not working. In fact, it is too often deadly to Black and brown communities, particularly Black men. And I feel an obligation and a responsibility to respond to that moment and that vote, and the ongoing work that I do has to be a response to that.
Okay. Now, Jimmy, you've used very strong language when you've talked about the police. You issued a statement when you voted against it, that you would use your power and privilege to end white supremacy and a police state that brutalizes Black and brown people. Now, does that make it hard to work with the NYPD to come up with resolutions to its problems, such as police brutality? Does it make it difficult to sort of sit down with them and say, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z to fix the problem? I mean, there's one thing about, protesters justly going out there and using harsh language, but does it make it difficult for the elected official to bridge that gap with them? How do you sort of play that off each other?
I don't think that has to be the consequence of strong but accurate language around systemic racism and police brutality. Those things are real. The murder of George Floyd was real, and that is not an isolated incident. The response of the NYPD to the uprising in New York City and the rallies was disgraceful, and I stand by that. I do believe Dermot Shea should have been fired, and still believe he should be fired. Those are my very strong convictions, and I absolutely stand by my belief that we must re-envision policing. And what I think would behoove the leadership of the NYPD is to take the criticism to heart. I mean, there was a report that was just issued that was scathing in terms of the NYPD's response, often brutal to the protesters who were peacefully in the streets. And the police commissioner basically said that we did nothing wrong. And I don't see how anyone could come to that conclusion after watching all of the video that all of us have seen. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to speak up and to speak up forcefully, because that is the only way that there will be change. If we have seen one thing throughout this year and preceding years, is that the internal culture of the NYPD is one of the hardest to change and one of the most resistant to change. And that is a significant problem for so many people who are simply looking for equal treatment. And so I'll keep fighting for it, as I said, for as long as I am alive.
Now, Jimmy, has it made it difficult to work with like the 108 precinct or the 114th precinct? You know, they might sort of be taken aback or feel under siege. Has it made it difficult to work with them? Are you able to go down there and say, hey, Commander, listen, I think you need to do this and that? How's that gone?
We have 2 new commanders. As you know, I represent most of the 108th precinct, and I represent a significant portion of the 114th precinct. We have 2 new commanders who have just been appointed to our local precincts. I've spoken with both of them on multiple occasions, and those are ongoing conversations where we have productive conversations. And I think that you can disagree on a political question. You could even disagree on the culture of the NYPD. You could disagree on the defund the NYPD movement. But I have stressed to both Captain Jenkins and Captain Wise that my positions are my positions, and I do not shrink from them or apologize from them. But they and I have an ongoing dialogue, and that is something that one would expect. That on occasion, whether it's the drag racing a problem that was pretty severe over the summer, and other things, that there needs to be some dialogue, and there was.
Okay, so you were able to have dialogue without any problems, despite your sort of strong stance, such as referring to them as like a police state, etc. When there were issues like drag racing and Hunters Point issues on the parks and things, you were still able to communicate, and they were still receptive to you. Is that fair?
Again, Captain Wise and Captain Jenkins have been very communicative.
Okay, great. Okay, moving on to a new topic, development. There have been several developments, proposed in your district, the 26th Council District, and there have been others in Flushing, Industry City, and Brooklyn. You've pretty much come out against most of them, or all of these ones that I've just mentioned. Why so? I mean, you'll have people that'll say, they create jobs, etc. So can you give us a little bit of give us a rundown as to what your issues were with these developments?
Sure. Well, look, I think wealth inequality is the defining issue of our time. We live in a world where one man, Jeff Bezos, can be worth $3 $300 billion. And the vast majority of people in our district, in Queens, and in this world barely have enough to live. That is immoral. That is wrong. And so everything that we do has to be a response to that inequality. And when we talk about development, that is one of the prime drivers of inequality and housing insecurity. Take, for example, the Flushing rezoning that was just passed, which I am proud to have voted against. 5% of the apartments in that complex will be, quote unquote, affordable, which means 95% will be market rate and luxury. How could anyone in this day believe that that was a good deal? It will absolutely continue to price people out. Industry City, again, a massive, massive plan that met with significant community opposition. Your LIC also, again, where the mayor is the person who ultimately stopped negotiating with the developers. And I think part of that was over how much money they would contribute to infrastructure. But even without that set of facts known to most, the truth is, you know, a 75-25 or even a 70-30 split where 25% are affordable and 75 to 70% are market and luxury, particularly on the waterfront, is simply not acceptable. And we have to create a new paradigm where we re-envision development and planning. And I think that that's driving my response to these projects, where we have to understand that the process is broken, that ULURP has to be re-envisioned completely, and we need more community-driven planning efforts. And we absolutely have to push back, because let's be real, these developers, many of whom are billionaires, want to keep the system going as it is. Why? Because it works for them. They make billions of dollars on these projects. And, you know, when we even talk about jobs, we have to talk about what kind of jobs and what kind of a world we want to live in. Is everyone given a fair shot at a good job and good affordable housing, guaranteed housing, or do we continue a system where wealth inequality grows? And that's really the defining issue of our day, that more and more people, I think, are coming to understand that a world in which so few people control so much of the world's wealth, while millions literally go hungry and have no roof over their head, or are barely clinging to a roof over their head, is morally wrong. And that's why things will change. And I think that is fundamentally driving my work, my activism, my service, and wherever I will be, in whatever position I may be in my life, I will continue that. This is not simply a response to a political moment. It's absolutely a value system, and one that I have, as I've grown a little bit older, gotten angrier about, as I have seen inequality grow. And, you know, I think the Amazon fight, the disinvestment in public housing, and when you juxtapose those and consider those together, it's just wrong.
Right. I mean, look, I mean, that's, that's undisputable what you're saying, and, quite laudable. But, you know, you do have these sites like Flushing Creek is a very undesirable site. It's polluted. It looks ugly. You've got underutilized land down by Annabelle Basin there. Now, I'm not saying it's an either or. You have these big developments or you have underutilized land, but what's a happy medium that would make Jimmy Van Bramer say, all right, well, let's clean up this disastrous mess on the Flushing Creek. Let's clean up, these ugly sites in LIC. What would be acceptable to you where we can get that balance whereby, the inequities can be, addressed while at the same time we have cleaner areas?
Look, we agree on that, and I think most people will agree. Even many of the progressive organizers and activists would agree that something should happen at Annabelle Basin. And we do want a waterfront that's active and clean. But what I think is false is the proposition that the only way to get there is through giving over the land to billionaire developers, and that they will clean it up or they will build the school or the park. And I think this gets to the heart of how we re-envision planning and having a community-led effort that speaks to what the community wants and needs, driving the discussion. And then I think, look, if you buy into the proposition that the only way that we can get these things done is rely on billionaires, then I disagree with you. But if we accept the fact that if we actually taxed billionaires in the way that they should be taxed, and we made sure that they were doing their fair share, that we could reinvest billions of dollars into a real community-led planning effort that led to those very improvements that I think virtually everyone wants to see happen, but that doesn't force 70-story, predominantly luxury condominium towers or rental towers onto people in exchange for those much-needed community improvements. And so there is a path forward. I do think that something should happen there, but I think that the only way that the city of New York through Europe has seen its way to changes like that are through the leaning on and depending on billionaire developers to get it done, which, by the way, also often includes incredible subsidies to those billionaires of taxpayer funding. So the system as it is broken. We want to see good things done. We want to see an active waterfront. We want to see a park.
What would you like to see there, though, Jimmy? I mean, yeah, I don't think too many people want to see 70-story towers. And it wasn't really an either or question, you either get this or nothing at all. But what would be acceptable to you? I mean, in such sites?
Well, look, I think the community has spoken about the need for a resilient waterfront that includes, that includes a large public green space, right? That includes the resiliency that one needs in the era of climate change. And we certainly want more schools, and we certainly need and have, I think, lots of people proposed community land trusts in the area, maybe a community center, turning the DOE building, which is a city-owned property, into something like that. There's other city-owned property down there. And so you don't need massive developer-led housing to actually deliver on those needs, whether they be schools, parks, cultural facilities. And then I think if you're talking about housing down there, what does that look like? If you have city-owned land, which you do, significant city-owned land there, why aren't we talking about
most of it is
human interest?
private.
And
Most of it is.
most of it is, but a significant chunk is city-owned.
Yeah.
And so on that city-owned land, why aren't we talking about 100% affordable housing, right? Why is the city still leaning on the 75-25, 70-30 model? And then you're right, on some of that private land, there has been contemplated massive luxury towers, and that's just something I'm never going to approve. And that's why I think we're at an impasse in the city in terms of, I think, community activism and organizers talking about a way to re-envision the waterfront and what happens there. And I think that site will ultimately have good things happening there, but I think it's going to have to be done in a very different way than the current leadership at City Hall and the current developer class, believes it should happen.
Okay. Now, you were, very blunt about Jeff Bezos. Obviously, Amazon, it just keeps coming up again and again and again. And I know it's rear view mirror sort of stuff, but you do have people that say, "Oh, listen, today the New York economy's, going through a tough period, or will be soon. 25,000 jobs. Wouldn't have that been lovely, given where we're at now?" What do you tell those people?
Well, I dispute that. They weren't coming in with that many jobs, and it certainly wasn't going to be in one fell swoop. Anyway, the second thing I would say is that Amazon is and persists in being a bad employer, not only anti-union, but anti-worker. And the National Labor Relations Board has just ruled against them in a very important case. I don't think those people who talk about jobs want jobs where working people get abused, where working people are forced into horrific working conditions, making $18 an hour, but Jeff Bezos and his company gets to make billions while abusing those workers. So the question is not just about jobs, it's about what kind of jobs we're talking about. And it's kind of what kind of society we want. And I think that if we, once again, buy into the system that creates people who are worth $300 billion by exploiting working class people, many of whom are Black and brown, making $18, $19, $20 an hour, that is something we should not accept and that we should not encourage. In fact, we should continue to push Amazon to be broken up and big tech to be broken up. It is way too big. It is way too powerful. And monopolies have come back into society through big tech, and breaking them up and demanding that they are equitable places, fair and just places to work is what we should be fighting for. And until then, we should not ever be throwing $3 billion in taxpayer money at the richest man in the world, when in fact that funding should be used to lift up the people who are most impacted by the COVID pandemic and by systemic racism. If we reward Jeff Bezos,
but Jimmy,
are we cutting bad behavior? We'll just.
No, Jimmy, do you think it could be a case of sort of cutting off our nose to spite our face? I mean, a lot of people, would be happy with $18, $20 an hour jobs in the present economy. And yes, it would be rewarding, a man with excessive wealth. But at the same time, I mean, a lot of people would want $20 an hour jobs right now.
Well, look, the fact is the Amazon, this is the big lie, right? I mean, Amazon has continued to bring jobs to New York. It has continued to build fulfillment centers. It has continued to rent enormous amounts of space, bringing jobs here. So the big lie is that Amazon left and none of those jobs came to New York, and none of them will.
But they
That's not
didn't
true.
come to Long Island
Amazon
City or
continues.
Queens. They went to other parts.
Well, but as far as I know,
Mm,
Christian,
mm,
people can get on a subway or a bus and go to the fulfillment center in Woodside if they want, or go to the new site in Maspeth if they want
fair enough.
to apply for a job. They can also take the 7 train into Manhattan for one of those big high-tech jobs at the corporate office that they're opening there. It's just false narrative.
Mhm.
The truth is that Amazon is doing all that it was going to do. It just isn't getting $3 billion in taxpayer money to do it. That was a just fight, and that is the right fight. Now, while Amazon continues to grow at unprecedented levels, the job still is there for all of us
Mm.
to pressure them to be a better employer and ultimately to break them up because they're simply too big, and it is just immoral that one person could be worth $300 billion when millions of people go hungry every night.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. I'm going to move on from Amazon. It's sort of been beaten up for the last couple of years.
Yes.
So, FIPS, the development on Barnard Avenue in Sunnyside. It's 100% affordable in terms of the housing units, but it is getting some pushback, although the community board did approve it. How does Jimmy Van Bramer view that development or proposal?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've said before that the issues at the current Phipps Garden Apartments are ones that I take very seriously. And I did tour the grounds with some of the residents and even went into one person's apartment who had some issues. And look, I think the opportunity to have real deep affordable housing in a 100% affordable housing project that has a set aside for formerly homeless individuals is one that we should take seriously. You can't and should not just dismiss that out of hand. And I have not said how I will vote should this come to the city council, in part because the Phipps Corporation has signed a letter to the community board and to the community stating that they have an improvement plan for the current Phipps Garden Apartments. Associated with that plan are deadlines, 30, 60, 90-day deadlines. And I'm not going to say that I approve or disapprove of this plan until I see them complete and satisfy that improvement plan, which the community board was able to procure from them.
Mm,
So it is an ongoing process. Phipps is doing some things, and then I hear other things, but it is not the same thing as Flushing. I will say that when you have a 5% affordable plan that has thousands of apartments, most of them luxury, and then if you equate that with this plan, I don't see them as identical. I think we could and should make this project even more affordable if possible, and work to make sure that should it happen, even more people could afford those apartments. But again, it's something that's ongoing, and Phipps has got a plan that they have to abide by, and we'll see if they abide by it.
mhm. Now, you opposed the plan 4 years ago. It was a bigger complex. the affordable levels were not quite, as reduced, I guess. So has that had a big impact on your feeling in terms of this proposal? That it's a little bit smaller, that the income levels are a bit lower?
Well, there were several issues with the plan 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think you must acknowledge that this plan is different than the proposal from 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at 4 years ago, the building was significantly taller. There were more units. At the time, Phipps had a decidedly anti-union stance and would not agree to unionized workers in the building. And I obviously had a problem with that. The affordability levels were not acceptable by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there were ongoing concerns by the tenant association at Phipps Garden Apartments. Fast forward to this proposal, the building is scaled back and scaled down. There are fewer units. There is a deal for union workers, and the affordability levels have been greatly reduced. Again, I think they can and should be reduced even further, but they have been greatly reduced. And there is a set aside for formerly homeless families. And while there are clearly still issues with the tenant association and some others with the maintenance of the existing Phipps buildings, I know that there's an improvement plan in the works. I know that there are meetings, ongoing regular meetings scheduled between Phipps and the tenants. So this is a very different scenario, a very different set of facts. And that's what I'm looking at, and that's what I'm going to ultimately make my decision on, is not what was before us 4 years ago, which I very much opposed, but what is before us today, which is a very different plan. Not to mention that the community board, of course, was very much against the proposal 4 years ago, but is very dramatically in favor of it this time.
Yeah, okay. All right. You addressed obviously luxury housing and rezoning, those issues within your report. I need to talk to you about, some of these capital expenditures, especially on parks. I mean, the Hart Playground I see is, being completed. You've got the, the park space, the Davidson Park area after the firefighter that passed it, well, that killed in service. Can you tell us about how those projects are developing and, your thoughts on them?
Well, I am a big believer in our public parks and making sure that they are invested in, maintained, even building new parks where there were none before, and making sure that that's done equitably across the district. So this year we cut the ribbon and formally opened the new park house in Queensbridge Park, for example, in what was an abandoned park house for over 30 years that community members pointed out to me on multiple trips to the park. We invested over $6 million and have built a state-of-the-art, beautiful park house, which will be a community hub and facility, of course, once those kinds of gatherings are allowed post-COVID. But that was an important project that was finished this year.
No, that park's in great shape. That park's in fantastic
That
shape.
park has, when I became the council member, when I was running for office in 2009, if you remember, I remember a member of the community taking me to the edge of the park by the river and showing me how the seawall had collapsed. The entire seawall on Esplanade had fallen into the river. And the city of New York had neglected that and allowed the park literally to crumble into the river year after year. And working together with others, other elected officials and the community, that seawall and Esplanade was rebuilt. That is one of the things that I'm most proud of as a council member. And we then renamed it after Elizabeth McQueen, who of course was the mother and grandmother of that park. But in all of those visits and watching that reconstruction of the seawall is when we saw the park house and knew we had to also do the park house, because the children that play in that park, many of whom live in Queensbridge, need to be able to see that their park is just as beautiful as any park in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And I do not accept that we can have abandoned structures in Queensbridge Park, and that's why we rebuilt that park house. We also, and I'm very excited, and just today went this morning to Hart Playground, and Hart Playground is on the very last block of our district in Eastern Woodside, and it had not been redone in over 30 years. That part of Woodside is incredibly rich in new Americans, immigrants from all over the world. And I also wanted
it's a very busy park.
that park was, it is an incredibly busy park, and it had not been touched. And we had gone through there so many times, saw that the equipment was broken, saw that the play equipment was degraded over years. And we invested over $3 million. This project, by the way, was completed this year. We broke ground in February, and it is done. It is open today to the public, a beautiful new, fully gutted and restored Hart Playground in a part of Woodside that not everyone in the district has been to, but it is a beautiful park, a beautiful part of our district, and a beautiful part of Woodside. And then, of course, there's Davidson, where it's been a long saga in terms of that parcel of land, but it's also one of those rare occasions where, with city funding that I secured, we were able to take a privately owned parcel of land, repurchase it, and make sure that it would become a public park and playground. And I secured the funding to purchase the property, and have also secured the funding to build it out. As you know, we had our first scoping meeting where nearly 200 people Zoomed in together to talk about their visions for that park and playground. And of course, we are working on phase 3 of Noonan Playground, which we've done a walkthrough with the Parks Commissioner and the Friends of Noonan. And, you know, I'm really proud. I think people want and need, particularly in neighborhoods where most people live in apartments, need to have that space for the kids to run around, for people to be able to sit, enjoy life, talk to neighbors, particularly obviously in this time when we've been so disconnected.
Now, Jimmy, does Noonan still have a dog run coming?
It does.
It does.
It absolutely does. We have gone over the plans, and that is in motion. And I hope they'll be able to break ground on the dog run and the further improvements. It's not just a dog run, but there are a number of improvements that'll be made in phase 3 of Noonan Playground of improvements. We've invested several $1 million into that park and playground, and rightfully so. It's an incredibly important park and playground in Sunnyside.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking good now just from phase 1 and 2. But I mean, all right. When do you anticipate breaking ground on phase 3?
I'm hoping that's going to happen in this calendar year, that's for sure.
Okay, all right, great. Last thing I want to bring up about your report is open streets. You mentioned in the report how you're pleased with the way 39th Avenue open street is going. You're also advocating in Jackson Heights for 34th Avenue to maybe even be a permanent open street. Can you just tell us about, you know, your view on open streets, you know, that's essentially been that has essentially come about, you know, for social distancing purposes during COVID. Can you just give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we talk about in the report is that, you know, I'm pleased that there is now a 39th Avenue Open Streets Coalition, a community-led effort to take care of the open street, to move the barricades when they're supposed to be moved, and to ultimately program the street, which I think is really important. I think understanding the value of open streets is easier when you see programming happening, when you see story times occurring, when you see yoga classes happening. And I think that's been a challenge on 39th Avenue and Skillman Avenue to date.
Yes,
but I think this coalition of community-led members, I'm hopeful, is going to be able to demonstrate the value of an open street, which is manyfold, right? I think on 39th Avenue, as you know, I live right off 39th Avenue. I've received complaints about speeding over the years, many times. And the truth is that the open streets barricades very much significantly reduce speeding on 39th Avenue. We've had a drag racing problem. And I think in addition to open streets, obviously we've called on DOT to install other traffic calming measures and measures that would stop drag racing. But this is again one of those tools in the toolbox that can make streets safer. Beyond that immediate need, I think it is important for all of us who care about climate change and the city of New York having a future, that we re-envision and rethink how we use streets, which of course are public land. And I think the Open Streets program, which is a direct response to COVID and to give people the ability to safely socialize in and during a pandemic, but it's also given people the opportunity to sort of rethink. As I mentioned, while some people live in private homes, most people live in apartments in our district and in the city of New York. And it is imperative that we create even more space for people to play and socialize safely. And I think open streets are a way to do that. 34th Avenue, you mentioned, of course, is the model where they have very, very successfully had, again, a community-led driven effort that has been able to successfully program the street and get more community buy-in by demonstrating its value and and of course the architecture of that avenue is very different than 39th or Skillman, but there it is much easier to put up barricades and where they have successfully stopped traffic from entering 34th Avenue. But it is a good program and it should absolutely be continued. 34th Avenue should absolutely be made permanent because it is created a pedestrian thoroughfare that sort of has extended Travers Park into a significant stretch of Jackson Heights. And I think we can see that model and then we can hopefully replicate it. And I think the folks at the 39th Avenue Open Streets Coalition are looking at that model and I think hoping to replicate it to the extent that you can, realizing that 34th Avenue is a very different streetscape than 39th Avenue.
Right, okay. One thing you talk about is, a protected bike lane network. How are you getting on with that? I mean, you talked about, a lot of that in Long Island City moving forward. In your report, you also talk about the success of the protected bike lane on Crescent Street. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the city just talked about how many miles of protected bike lanes were created in 2020.
30 miles.
And yeah, that is a good start. And I think the city should continue to aggressively do that. And I think what we know is that protected bike lanes make streets safer. And I think that we live in an era where the loudest voices get heard. And we've also had a president that has actually devalued the very meaning of truth, and facts. But facts and truth are on the side of protected bike lanes, and a network of protected bike lanes will reduce traffic violence, traffic deaths across the board. They've proved to be successful. Crescent is a great success, driven by activists and community organizers, but one I was proud to support. And I think you see that. And I think we will not be happy until we actually accomplish Vision Zero, when there are 0 people dying on our streets. That happens when you create more space for pedestrians and cyclists, which are far less deadly than cars and trucks. You know, we have mentioned the speeding and drag racing, right? These are really dangerous things, and yet some of the same people who complain about that hate protected bike lanes and other traffic calming measures that actually save lives. Mm-hmm. So, look, I think this is a very, very good movement in the right direction. But I think the next mayor and council, I hope, are even more aggressive. And certainly in Queens, we have to create a network, a borough-wide network, and make sure that people can bike to work. And let me just say this: during the pandemic, we've seen more and more people avoiding public transit and biking to work, biking to visit friends and family, biking to shop. Mm-hmm. But what we have also seen, and what we have always known, is that the bike lanes also provide a safe network for delivery workers. And if we're talking about a more just society, isn't it imperative that the folks who are delivering your food, delivering the pizza, delivering the Italian food, delivering the Chinese food, that they're safe riding their bikes to and from that restaurant and your home? Mm. Protected bike lanes do that. And that is something that I feel very strongly about. And I hope that people see, like literally see, those delivery workers and know that the person who comes to your house to deliver that wonderful Mexican food from De Mole deserves a safe commute back and forth from that restaurant to your home.
Okay. Now, the outer roadway on the Queensborough Bridge, I've run it, and it's tight. You know, bikes and pedestrians, it's tough. I mean, when I've gone across there, it's not good for anyone. Now, you're a proponent of, using the, the south lane where the vehicles are now for pedestrians. Is that correct?
Yes, it is a dangerous crossing for cyclists, pedestrians, rollerbladers, anybody who's trying to traverse that outer roadway. And it's very dangerous. There have been crashes. I have biked it many times myself. And so the proposal that is widely supported by elected officials, by Community Board 2, is to turn the south outer roadway into a pedestrian-only roadway. So cyclists would have full access to the north and pedestrians to the south, everyone having an appropriate amount of space to safely cross the bridge. Again, it's worth noting that during the pandemic, many more people are commuting and crossing into Manhattan using a bike or walking or rollerblading, those who can, obviously, weather permitting. So it's an incredibly sensible solution to a dangerous situation, and the Department of Transportation has sadly not moved on it, been hemming and hawing. Councilmember Kalos and I have offered to fund the project. The DOT has not been responsive lately. Obviously, Commissioner Trottenberg just left the position, but I'm really disappointed that DOT has not prioritized this project, and we'll keep fighting for it. And I believe that virtually everyone sees the value of this.
Okay, great. All right, I'm moving on to a whole different topic now, Joey. There's a lot of people that are running for your spot, to be the council member starting 2022. I mean, what are your thoughts on the field that has come forward? All, I think 17, 18, some big number. What's your thoughts on the candidates that have come forward? And what would you like to see the next council member put forward, or their viewpoints?
Well, I think it's exciting that so many people are running for the seat. I think, quite frankly, it's also challenging for voters to sort of get a firm grasp on the race, because there are just so many people running, and most of them are new to people. Most of them are relatively unknown to most people in the district. So it's a real challenge. But I think it's great that so many talented people have thrown their hat in the ring. As someone, obviously, who's run for office, I know how difficult it is to run. And so I applaud all of them for daring to do this. It is not easy. It's not easy, particularly in this climate, in this day and age, to run for office. It's even more challenging because of COVID, because the opportunities for all of the candidates to introduce themselves are limited. And the opportunity to go door to door, for example, is going to be very limited and challenging with COVID. So I feel sorry for them in that sense, that it's a very challenging environment. But I see lots of them out there. Obviously, I know many of them and have spoken to many of them. And, I think the field could narrow because of either the fundraising or the petitioning exercise that will go on in the next couple of months. But, I want to see someone, and obviously I have one vote in this election myself. I want to see someone who's going to work really hard at it, who's going to care a great deal about the district. Obviously, I want to see a progressive person elected to succeed me. And, I believe that we have several people who are really good and really outstanding. And, it's always not clear to me exactly who is running. And I know, a couple of people have recently left the race, but I'm anxious to see it unfold and see if anyone takes off, or if and when there are debates. I assume there'll be debates virtually, although it's going to be hard to put them all on one stage. But
are there two or three names out there, Jimmy, that you might say, oh, listen, I think this person has kind of got a similar ideology as yourself, that you think, well, I'd like to see, emerge from the pack?
Well, I appreciate the effort, and I know you have to ask that question, but I am not going to name names. I will say only that there are several really terrific progressive candidates that are in the race. And as I was going to say, I'm interested to see, as the race unfolds, how they delineate themselves from the others, and see more of their platforms, and who gets behind them. And so I think it's That's
Could we
not entirely early, but it's a little early.
could we get? I mean, are we going to see Jimmy Van Bramer endorses XYZ anywhere down the road?
I at this point uh, can't say. I don't rule it out, but I'm inclined at this point to let it play out,
Mm.
and we'll see. I certainly think that there are some moments where folks are going to have to demonstrate the seriousness of their candidacy. One of them is the January 15th financial filing, and then there'll be a March 15th filing. Obviously, there'll be a petition effort. Folks will have to start to produce literature and a campaign team. And, I think when we get into some of that, we'll start to see how people are running and how serious they are. And, I'll continue to watch it, obviously, closely.
Would you put together maybe a slate with ranked choice voting? You might be able to say, well, these are the 3, 4, 5 that I think you should go with. Is that something you might consider?
I think that in a ranked choice voting world, which I greatly support and think is a wonderful thing, and I think is probably very helpful to people in the 26th district when you have 17 choices and you're trying to figure out not necessarily that you only like one of them, but maybe that you like a handful. But in this year, you will get to actually rank your top 5. And so that is possible. I certainly will fill out my own personal top 5 when I go to vote in this election. And if I were to make an endorsement or express a preference, it might be
say
in the
you don't have to
form.
say number 1, 2, 3, 4 in this order. You could just
That's right.
say, these are the 5 names that I like. Just keep that in mind.
Yes, no, I am well aware, and look, I also am sensitive to the fact that there are 17 people running, and the district has this decision to make, and I could be helpful to some people in making a decision.
So moving on. The question right now is Jimmy Van Bramer, is he going to make a run for Queensborough president? Is he going to take on Donovan Richards? Why would he do so? And what would your platform be, so to speak? So first of all, are you going to run?
For that, I would say I'm seriously considering running, and stay tuned. But no announcement here today, but very seriously considering it. And in terms of why, look, we have an election. There was a primary last year to fill the rest of Melinda Katz's term. But there is a proper primary in June for borough president. And I think, and I've long believed this, gone are the days when people should get a pass and voters should be denied a choice or a say. So there's a proper election for a full term for borough president. And I think that running based on a progressive platform that, again, challenges some of the ways in which business has been done, whether it be, a real estate and revenue-dominated political structure that also rests on the dominance of a political machine, is something worth talking about. And I think talk about some of these projects that you've talked about, Industry City, your LIC, the Flushing rezoning, those are things that we should talk about. And I'm a firm believer that.
I know Donovan Richards was supportive of those projects that you just mentioned. Is that kind of where you would sort of position yourself, saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not a fan of these types of developments," and sort of juxtapose that with him? Is that kind of where you're going?
Well, look, I don't think anyone should run simply based on oppositional views
Mm-hmm.
to another candidate, right? One must run on their own vision
Mm.
for the borough or the district that you're running in, and be able to articulate that.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to run for borough president, that is how I would run. Certainly, as you point out, there are points of difference, and I think those are worth raising. And I think no matter what I choose to do, I certainly don't want Rebney calling the shots in Borough Hall. I certainly don't want Rebney
I think that's the case
being
now.
able. What's that?
Do you think that's the case now?
I think there is a level of closeness and affiliation
Mm-hmm.
that I do find disturbing.
Okay.
And I think that these council races are very important. All of them, not just the 26th. That we're going to create a more just society, if we're going to attack wealth inequality, if we're going to re-envision how we plan and do land use, then I think we need progressive challengers who are going to be able to raise these issues and hold people accountable, including incumbents.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's worthy. I think the race is worthy. The issues are incredibly important, and I think challenging the status quo is incredibly important in this moment. So, again, stay tuned. More to come on this, but
last
I
question on
certainly
that.
don't have enough.
Last question on that, Jimmy. When you pulled out last year, you sort of expressed, that you were having some, family concerns. What's changed since then for you? Are you in a better place now to run in terms of on a personal level?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's an important question, and the truth is that and I've spoken a little bit, but I think most people, including many of the people who follow me on social media and who have seen me walking with my mother all over the district, know that she is someone who is really strong and fighting really hard, but obviously dealing with dementia. And that took a real toll on us when she was diagnosed about a year and a half ago. And then she took a very serious fall outside St. Joe's in Astoria, which we obviously didn't publicize in any way, but we were real worried about her about this time last year, and it took a heavy toll on me. And I wasn't in a good place to mount the vigorous run that everyone needs to. If you're ready to run, you've got to be all in, you've got to be able to do it. And so I had that weighing on me very heavily. What's changed, and this is incredibly ironic, of course, is COVID forced us, and by that I mean me and my siblings, to come up with a care plan for my mother. And we became better caregivers for my mother. And we have learned what she needs and how to protect her in this moment and care for her. So she's a lot better than she was a year ago. And I'm grateful for that. But as a result, I am also stronger. And so I wouldn't even consider this if if she weren't in a place that I felt good about, and that I wasn't in a place where I felt I could give 100% to this effort. And so it's been a very difficult year for all of us. COVID has been brutal for our family, just as it has been for everyone else's. But because we've had this time to devote to my mother, I believe that she is in a much better place. Dementia doesn't get better. It's not curable, but she's stable. She is as happy as she can be, and so I am in a position to run should we decide to do so. And I will just end by saying that when I left the race in the special election, and I told my mother that I had left the race, it wasn't something that she was fully able to process. And so throughout this entire year, she has continued to ask me when I'm running and when the election is, and telling me that I should and that I would win. So I have my mother's endorsement to this day, and that may not mean much to anyone else, but it means a lot to me.
Okay, I've got two more questions, Jimmy, and I thank you for your time.
Sure.
What do you think your chances are of winning that race?
I wouldn't enter a race that I didn't think I had a chance of winning. Obviously, anytime you run against an incumbent supported by the establishment, that's a challenge, and I am not ignorant of the challenge that would represent. But that's not a reason not to run, right? If there's a principled reason to run, if there are issues that really should be aired and should be discussed, and if there's a values-based platform that I think it's important to share, then I would run. Obviously, whenever you run, you're never assured a victory. When I ran for this council seat in 2009, I was not the favorite to win the race. As you know, the machine had chosen someone else, one of the district leaders. Virtually all of the elected officials endorsed that district leader, and very few people thought that I could win.
Okay.
But I won.
Last question, Jimmy. When are we going to know whether you're running or not? Are we going to know in 2 weeks' time?
I think that if you look at the timeline of the race, I certainly think that there will be an answer in January for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, Jimmy, thank you very much for all the time you gave today, and, for discussing so many topics. Appreciate it.
Thank you.